We all have our daily, weekly, and monthly things that we do to run our households. And when you add a baby into that, it just throws a wrench in the whole thing, and that's one of the things we don't think about before the baby comes is how much we're actually already doing. Never mind work, because you're like, oh, I'm going to take maternity leave and I have X amount of weeks off. And so that's squared away. Your home is another job that you're not thinking is a job. And so when you can take that off your plate and put it on autopilot as much as possible before the baby arrives, you just have more time to bond with your baby, your partner, and more time for yourself.
Hey everyone, I'm your midwife, Tanya Tringali. Welcome to the Wit podcast, a show about the issues we, healthcare consumers and providers, face every day as we interact with the medical system. We'll talk about its blind spots, shortcomings, and share strategies we can use to feel seen and heard, no matter which side of the table we sit on. My guest today is Kallista Andersen, host of the new Mom Boss podcast. I was on her podcast in January, and I'll link to that episode in the show notes. Kallista helps people get ready for their baby by preparing themselves, their space, and their partners for what lies ahead. She does this through her podcast, coaching, and an online course that she calls the New Mom Prep School. Kallista is also a registered nurse, a certified lactation counselor, and a mom of 3. Kallista, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me on. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation because I think you have an interesting take on something that our listeners could really learn from, and even our healthcare providers, right? Because our healthcare providers end up in conversation with their clients about regular things. Like, that's what we want. We want conversations that aren't just solely focused on medical, that kind of recognize the importance of like our whole selves and all the parts of our lives being represented in our overall health. And I think you bring that to this discussion. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is, so much is missing in healthcare that there is a big void that I am trying to help fill. And I know a lot of the people such as yourself that have come on my show and other guests have the same mission. And I think it's totally needed. We have a long way to go, but we're working on it.
Definitely. So, okay, your perspective on this, as I understand it, was shaped in part by your own experience. So as I understand it, you had your first 2 kids 13 months apart, and that is kind of how you came to this passion for the work that you're doing. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about that experience and how it led into the work that you currently do. Because, from where I sit, I'm a mom of 1 who never for a minute felt ready to have a second kid. And by the time I had a 7-year-old, I knew I was done and I wasn't going to have another kid. So I'm always really fascinated by people who either knew or were just brave enough to have 2 kids close together, let alone then go on to have a 3rd or more.
Well, when we make plans, God laughs, right?
Exactly.
So I love telling my story just because it is kind of what catapulted me into doing what I do. So I had all intentions to just be a nurse, not just, but that was my career, And then after having my first and second, I became very passionate about helping other moms. And so what happened was I had always wanted to be a mom. So I did all the things I thought we would normally do to prepare. And having my medical background, I felt very confident, going into pregnancy, and I wasn't afraid of the labor and delivery. And my husband's a doctor, and so I just felt confident as entering motherhood. And I'm a planner, I'm very organized. I got all the things ready way ahead of time. I even took time off of work, so the baby was going to be my sole focus. And she arrived, my daughter, and it was really, really hard. Harder than I ever expected it to be, with the sleep deprivation and not knowing how to breastfeed. I thought it was, I followed around a lactation nurse when I was in nursing school, and didn't I just tell you I always wanted to be a mom? So I'm like, that's enough, we're going to get this. And even though, as you know, and most listeners probably know this, it's breastfeeding is like the most natural thing, but doesn't mean it's easy, which I learned only when I got to that point. And so I had to quickly figure out, because I really wanted to breastfeed. And lucky for us, I found a breastfeeding support group, because I wasn't a lactation consultant at the time. And we got into the groove, and we were able to go on and breastfeed me and my daughter. And so, I was just kind of surviving those first few months, and kind of just disappointed in the experience, because it was harder than I thought. But, you're just surviving, right? Doing your best. And then when she was 4 months old, I found out I was pregnant again.
Wow.
And and so that's another thing that was kind of a misconception or a myth, that if you're breastfeeding, that's birth control. It wasn't the case. I learned later that it can be if you're exclusively breastfeeding and your baby is less than 6 months old. But I was supplementing a little bit with formula, and I wish I hadn't done that, because that really didn't help my supply. But anyhow, that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I first of all, I need to do something different before this next baby arrives, because I can't do this again. So I didn't know whether to laugh or be happy or cry. I chose not to cry, and I chose that, to plan differently. So what I came to learn was that even though I thought I was prepared, I couldn't say I was unprepared. I was misprepared. And I think that's what a lot of first-time moms do, is like we kind of spin our wheels and prepare for our baby, but we're preparing for the wrong things. And so second time around, I figured out what I really needed to prepare for that was valuable and that was really going to help me in the postpartum period. And I did that, and I went on to have a beautiful second postpartum experience. I really got to bond with my son, and, I felt a little sad that I didn't get to do that with my daughter. And so I started, since I had babies back to back, and I had friends having babies and family, they would ask me for advice, and it just became something I wanted to do. And I went on to create my company, New Mom Boss, to continue to help other moms, especially first-time moms, because you don't have to wait for the second time around to feel like you've got things. You can have that second-time mom feeling the first time around if you prepare the right things.
Absolutely. I love how you come at this, because I think, you get so intimately from your own experience that what you get in the medical environment, whether you're a patient or a provider, it can give you this false sense of security. And that sounds like, correct me if I'm putting words into your mouth, but it sounds like that's how you came into baby number one, was like you had every reason to think you were prepared. You were like more knowledgeable than the average person by nature of being a nurse. And you kind of got slapped in the face by the reality of the situation. So, if we can only imagine what it's like to not have that medical background.
Well, I like to say I had medical arrogance, and it really humbled me. And I thought like, wow, if I felt confident and I had this background of knowledge, I can't imagine a first-time mom who doesn't have any knowledge, doesn't feel confident because they're in a totally different profession, or someone who, it's so funny because having so many people on my show, it's a spectrum, the gamut of moms who always wanted to be moms like me, and I've had guests who never wanted to be moms and became a mom, and obviously they love it and they're so passionate passionate about it and go on to even help other moms in this space. But we all end up at the same place where we just want the best for our babies, and we're just striving or just we're just surviving, and we're just trying to get out of this kind of postpartum hole, whether it doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is. We all want the same things. That's like the common thing in humans is this, we just want the best for our babies.
Right. Regardless of how you come to parenthood, that is the universal. Absolutely. Wow. That's great. I'm curious, remind me, I think you told me, but I don't remember. What kind of nurse were you when you worked as a nurse?
An ICU nurse.
Oh, that's really different.
It is it's called intensive care for a reason. It was intense. And so it's literally keeping people alive, they're on the brink. So yeah, that's just because I had other plans. I had other plans before babies. I wanted to be a CRNA, a nurse anesthetist, and that's why I went to ICU. And then I met my husband, and he kind of changed my mind. And I was
So what kind of doctor is your husband?
He's an orthopedic surgeon.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious
different.
if either of you had anything to do with, maternal, fetal, anything. So.
No, but when he was a medical student, he actually delivered like 2 babies, just
cool.
by, happenstance in his rotation.
Yeah, right place, right time.
Have you encountered confusion and anxiety when it comes to feeding your baby? Whether you are in the prenatal stage or are already feeding your baby, I would love to partner with you so that you feel at ease about the feeding choices you make for your baby. My name is Nigrosh. As an internationally board certified lactation consultant, I can combine my expertise of hormones, milk supply, and infant and parent physiology with your expertise of your family situation to help you feel more joy and less frustration while feeding your baby. You can find all my information at my website at www.quabbinbirthservices.com.
Awesome. In hearing your story, I realized that we didn't quite get to the crux of all that you do and offer. And I want to kind of get a sense of what your coaching looks like. I don't know. Do you do it one-on-one? Do you offer classes? What's the structure of your coaching piece? I think your podcast, I think we all understand what you're doing there, and it's a beautiful mission. It overlaps with why I do mine, I'm sure. But you have this coaching piece and you have the online course. So can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I do one-on-one coaching. I want to meet the mama wherever she is. So some people prefer a one-on-one. Some like the group coaching, which is included in the courses for the most part. And so you could do courses only, and some people just like to do things alone and on their own pace instead of in a group or one-on-one. So it's a variety, forming a community where you can come in and get what you need and also have that support and be supportive to others. I think is so helpful. When you see you're not alone, you just feel better automatically. And so it's a lot of different levels. But yeah, it's definitely courses is like the foundation because there's so much education around, entering motherhood and the postpartum that you don't get while you're pregnant. When we're pregnant and we take that hospital class, and we read the books, we're so focused on the pregnancy and the delivery and the birth that the first 3 months is kind of an afterthought, and that is not the best place to start thinking of how you can support yourself because you just had birth. There's the whole recovery from pregnancy and birth, and then you're not sleeping. Obviously, the baby needs to eat every few hours, and so that takes a toll, and you're trying to keep the baby alive for the first time. I know that was my feeling was, wow, this really felt like a lot of pressure to make sure the baby was eating. I think that's we get into that we obsess over that a lot in the beginning. So the whole feeding of the baby is really top of mind the first several weeks.
Absolutely. And it's the thing that I think gets undermined as well. So it is obviously critically important. We know that. So that's why we obsess about it, because it's so important. But we get so many mixed messages early on. And I think that's one of the things that really throws people into a tailspin is this, they're just so afraid. They're afraid they're not doing it right. And, then it's like people who may really want to breastfeed change over to formula, and nothing against people who choose to use formula. The issue, I think, for me, for you, for a lot of people who do this work, is supporting people in their goal to breastfeed if that's what they want, and not undermining that. And that's what I think I see a lot.
Exactly. And the more you know, the more knowledge you gather before you get to that point, you'll know your options. You know what's normal and what's not normal, so that you can support yourself in your decision to breastfeed or not.
Yeah. So when do you start working with people?
My sweet spot, if I could have my way all the time, would be the second trimester during pregnancy, because that gives enough time, to slowly learn things. Second trimester is also when they're feeling a little bit better. They have that little extra energy after the first trimester. And then start putting things into place the third trimester so that you feel more ready when the baby comes. And I mean truly ready, not just like I have all the baby stuff and it's washed and in the drawers and the nursery is like Pinterest perfect. That was me first time around.
Well, that's a perfect segue into asking you what exactly you mean when you say put your home on autopilot before baby arrives, because I think that when people hear that, they might just think exactly what you said, like the simple, tangible things. And I know you mean so much more than that.
Right. And oh my gosh, the home is such a huge job that we do, almost not mindlessly, but it's already on autopilot, whether you think of it that way or not. We all have our daily, weekly, and monthly things that we do to run our households. And when you add a baby into that, it just throws a wrench in the whole thing, and that's one of the things we don't think about before the baby comes, is how much we're actually already doing. Never mind work, because you're like, oh, I'm going to take maternity leave, and yeah, I have X amount of weeks off, and so that's squared away. Your home is another job that you're not thinking is a job. And so when you can take that off your plate and put it on autopilot as much as possible before the baby arrives, you just have more time to bond with your baby, your partner, and more time for yourself, instead of, spending the few moments you have when baby's asleep working on house stuff.
Yeah. So how does this actually work? How do you explain to our listeners how they go about doing this?
Okay, so first and foremost, it has to enter your orbit, right? Like, oh, light bulb, I think I should start preparing the house, just like I'm preparing to take time off work. So it's a mindset shift, first off. And then I can quickly take everyone through a step-by-step that I love to teach, and I call it IDAD, which is inventory. And I'll go into each one quickly, but it's the IDAD acronym is inventory, delete, automate, and delegate. So automating your home. You need to first have an idea of all the things you're doing consciously, because we're just doing things all the time. We don't know. We actually have a long list of things that we normally do. So you want to take an inventory and talk to your partner or whoever else may live with you, because they're part of this, and list down all your daily, weekly, and monthly tasks and chores. And you want to keep this list a running list for a couple weeks at least, because then things will pop up, little by little, and you're like, by the end of the 2 weeks, you'll be like, holy moly, like I can't believe how much I'm doing already. And so you just get a picture, right, of all the things you and your partner are doing. So after that, you want to start deleting things that you can take off your plate that you don't normally, or you won't need for maybe 2 months or 3 months. And a good sub list of this is like your bills. Look at your subscriptions and memberships and things. You're probably not going to attend some club. If you have a club membership for like several weeks, you could take that off your list. And just things around the house that you can put down, So delete whatever you can. And then next, whatever's left, you want to automate. And the bills is my favorite thing. I mean, I actually don't love autopay, but for 2 months I could do that and just do autopay for as many bills as I can. You can automate shopping, the household staples, so that you don't have to worry about going to the store, or even I use Instacart a lot now, but even ordering that, you could just have something come to your door every week as a subscription. Then there's Amazon, there's other subscription shopping stores online. And so automate whatever is possible that you can automate. And then the last step of this is to delegate. So you want to look at your list once again and see what you can delegate. And this is actually a really good time to talk with your partner about the roles of these things, because we're used to, like, my husband takes out the trash and I pay the bills and I help the kids with the homework. Well, wasn't before I had kids, but we do these things that whether we've talked about it or not, we just know we're in charge of certain things. And so when the baby comes, this is what happens a lot with couples, first-time parents, is like you start to take score of who's doing what, or you just feel like, gosh, I feel like I'm carrying more of the load. And then the partner doesn't know, like, oh gosh, I didn't know you were doing all this. So just reassigning who's responsible for what. And then, I'm a big proponent of taking things off dad's plate too, or partner's plate too, because you want that time together. And so if you can outsource and delegate, whatever is doable for your household, a cleaning person, a gardener, someone to walk the dogs if you have, a dog, enlist family members. They're always, I love milking pregnancy, when they say, do you need anything, or let me know how I can help. Like, take them up on that, because it's not going to last forever, and it is really the time you want people to help you. And it's so hard for many of us, lots of us, to ask for help. So, when you're given the opportunity, just take it.
Yeah.
And so that's the last piece, is to just delegate as much as you can.
Well, I want to piggyback on what you just said about calling on family members, because while that is such a great idea, and as you point out, some people, many people, most people have a hard time asking for what they need, what ends up happening, I think, is inadvertently people end up with visitors, not helpers. And that is not the same thing. And I don't think people think about that beforehand, that we have to be a little careful about who we invite into our home in the days following the birth, or even weeks or months for some people, because if we slip into habits based on the way that relationship is, and now we are postpartum, sleep deprived, in pain, potentially all this stuff, and we find ourselves waiting on people. Can I get you a glass of water? Do you need anything? That's not what we brought them over for. And so I think that's a big piece of the preparation, is kind of helping people find the inner strength to be bold about that while they're still pregnant.
Yeah, and when you're pregnant, this is a great time to talk about it. They're not super excited to come over and see the baby yet. And I had a really cool masterclass once, and I'm going to do it again. It's called How to Set Loving Boundaries. And that's, it could be family that doesn't want to come over and you have no control over that. And then it could be friends and family that are hoverers, they just want to be so involved, and sometimes it's us too. One of the things I experienced was that, I wanted that adult conversation, and so I would have somebody come over, and it was meant to be like an hour visit and it turned into like 3 or 4 hours, and I could have napped during that time when the baby was napping, and I ended up, I know how the night goes, like 10, 11, when they wake up from that first long stretch, it's like, oh, I should have taken a nap myself, or at least just rested. So that was actually me wanting to keep the conversation going and just enjoying them. So one of the things I like to say when you have visitors, kind of set that boundary. You can even I have like a little template note that you tape on the front door, like, I'm so excited, like a little script on the paper saying, I'm so excited you're here, but I'm gonna want to chat like forever. Please stop me like at an hour so I can rest. And these are some things you can do while you're here that would be helpful, is like, wash the dishes, or, a few things that could be taken off your plate. So they're a little mommy helper while they're your visitor, and, filling yourself up with some love and some social time with your friends and family.
Absolutely. I so agree with all of that. I also think it's really important to tell visitors in advance that you can't know what you're going to be feeling like at that time, physically, emotionally, in terms of sleep, how are things going with feeding, all of that. So I think that when you give someone, a potential visitor, that insight that they're not thinking of, all they're thinking of is holding the baby. Like, it's a one-track mind. I want to meet and hold the baby. But when they get wind of like, oh, right, there's all these other things. Most people want to be helpful. They just hadn't thought of it yet, or they didn't know how. And so now you might get some people pulling back and giving you space, and they're the right people to pull back and give space. And you'll get some other people who really step up to the challenge or the task and understand that you can't know in advance what you're going to want or need. And so they really need to be willing to jump in whatever way it is that you need them at that time.
Exactly. I think everyone's focused on the baby and they forget mom. And so
Absolutely.
by saying that, it's a little like, ding, ding, ding. Oh, yeah, like you are going through this right now. I should be mindful of you and your rest and recovery. So, yeah, it's just a gentle like, hey, I'm here too.
And I think this is a way partners can actually take a often first step up in standing up for the person who's pregnant in the equation here, is to say, especially when it's the other side of the family, because that can be difficult for people, is to be like, hey, I just want to talk to you guys about this. I know you're excited. I know you want to meet the baby, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And it's an opportunity to like really show your support, because it's a challenging time. It doesn't mean it's not a beautiful time, but it's a very challenging time. So yeah, I think these are all really great tangible steps, and I love how you've made them so concise. Even when you first started and you said like, what do you do every day, every week, every month? And I'm like, that's so simple and yet so accessible. It's such an accessible way to think about all the things that we just mostly don't think about until it's too late.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest thing is, we think we could just throw the baby in our lives and we can keep doing things the way we were doing, but it's like you either change it or it's going to change you like big time. And like I said, like in the postpartum period, like using that time and it becomes an afterthought, it's still doable, but why not do it ahead of time and put as many things you can on autopilot and prepare like your family and your community, like you were just saying. And that way, when the baby comes here, it's really about bonding with your baby, recovering from birth, and just enjoying that time and thriving versus just like, oh, I can't wait till, this phase is over.
Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving and let's improve postpartum care together.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
So, other than some of the things you've mentioned, which are all great examples, what are your favorite or most important or most critical things that people should be thinking about before the baby arrives?
Well, we went over the household. I think that is a big piece that we miss as new parents. So after that, I would say shift some attention onto your relationship. It changes the dynamics. Of course you're excited to have your baby. Of course you love each other if you decided to have this baby together. So all that is there, but that's kind of not enough in the postpartum period. You need to prepare it as well, just like you're preparing the nursery, just like you're preparing your home and going off on maternity leave. And one tip I like to give for the relationship piece is, if you don't already know it, is to find out your love language, because that will help both of you just give each other the type of love that you know how to receive without even thinking about it. They're 5 and they're easy, and even without taking a quiz, which there's a simple quiz you can take online on many sites, it's quality time, touch, receiving gifts, acts of service, and words of affirmation. That's my husband. So words of affirmation. And we want all of them, right? But there's one that is like your top one. And so this is for the partners and family members. No matter what mom's love language is, acts of service is going to trump all that. So I love touch, but that was like low on my priority list in the postpartum period. I mean, yeah, hug me, and I appreciate that still. But it's the acts of service. Like the service needs to be bumped up. Like, let me hold the baby so you could shower or eat or you go outside, and so that's a tip for partners and family members, is just give mom acts of service, and that not only will she feel loved, but it's truly like physiologically what is going to help her.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I mean, one of the things I encourage couples to do, if somebody goes to my website, I'm sure some of our listeners have done so, but if you are on my website and you sit there for a little while, a pop-up comes up, and it is like a freebie that I give away that's called Preparing Your Relationship, right? And it goes through so much of what you just said, but you have this way of being very concise, and I really like that. That's really great, because I'm a little bit like wordy and I talk too much, but you are very concise and you say things in such a neat, clean way. I love it. But I do go through a lot of these things. And one of the things that is so important to me that people have often not thought about, and that I talk to couples about, so I really try to get partners to come to our sessions, I'm sure you do too, is the difference between equity and equality. I think we as modern women have spent so much time trying to create equal relationships, equal pay, equal this, equal that. We think about that a lot, and that's not to invalidate how important that is. But when it comes to trying times in life, we have to let that go, because it's never gonna work. We have to just be in this really extreme give and take and say, this is what I'm good at. This is what I have to offer, and step up and do that, and vice versa, and know that the tables will turn and it will come back. So I think about, like for instance, I'll give a personal example because it would come across as way too gendered if it wasn't personal. I hate sports, really hate sports. And I was afraid to have a boy, because I was like, what if my boy wants to play football? What will I do? That was a big fear of mine. And I did not have a partner who liked football either. But let's imagine a situation where somebody does. The time will come when maybe you had this really intensive time, breastfeeding, doing whatever you're doing, but now the kid's off playing football and dad loves football and they get to do that thing together, and now you're getting some free time that you've deserved for years. So that's a really long-winded way of saying it works itself out. It all comes out in the wash. But if we don't internalize that early, we spend a lot of time frustrated and like with a lot of tension building in the relationship because we're so busy thinking that it's not equal.
Yeah.
I don't know how you tackle that, but I mean, that's kind of the global way that I like to think about this from early on.
Oh, so much changes when the baby comes because, even more recently, just some of my good friends, they're very like 50-50 with household, like the finances and the household work. And then the baby comes and one of my friends thinks she could still do 50% of everything and take care of the baby. I'm like, no. That isn't how it works, It's like, is he home breastfeeding? Is he 50% of the time? Is he home? Is he up 50% of the night? Like, not to take score, which is, I mean, I just did it, but it's.
Well, you're pointing out why you don't want to do that. You're using it as an example of this is not sustainable.
It's not black and white. It's not like down the middle. You can't go Dutch on parenthood, especially in the postpartum period. Parents or couples, because that's another thing, right? You're lovers and now you're parents. When the baby's not here, everything could be like all roses and rainbows. But when the baby's here, that's when a lot of the hard discussions come up, and having them earlier and not in the midst of sleep deprivation where you're both not at your best is not the best time to have these conversations. So that's another big piece to prepare before the baby arrives, and it is so overlooked and undervalued, these conversations, because they're not easy all the time.
No, I think these are hard conversations, and I think a lot of people haven't had these conversations until push comes to shove, and oftentimes until they've found the right support that kind of nudges them to do it. Because again, you want to focus on all the positive. You want to focus on how good it's going to feel to have your baby in your arms. And I think one of the things that I've really been spending time with is this idea, I know I've said it on the podcast before, of a real sign of maturity and growth to me is being able to hold two opposing thoughts simultaneously and allowing them to be equally valid. So while you can love your baby and love your family, it can also be very hard, and it can be sometimes a dark time or a sad time or whatever, fill in the blank with whatever each person's individual experience is. But we need to talk about both, because I feel like, in this whole pendulum swinging that we've seen in the recent past, which I'm thrilled about and honored to be a part of, is talking about the harder stuff. Again, the pendulum swings and we talk about the hard stuff, and now maybe we're scaring everybody. Maybe we're taking away people's joy. And so lately I've really been thinking about how do we do both? Because even in the stories that are the hardest to hear, there's a lot of beauty to be had. So anyway, I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I agree 100%. And I've been there, like postpartum depression and still loving my baby. Postpartum, like no one told me about this. No one said, I never learned any of this in like nursing, or my, no one, I'm at my 20 OBGYN visits. I never heard anything about postpartum, like how to deal with the next 12 weeks.
Well, it's funny because just suddenly I'm thinking about, I often think in analogies, and, I'm thinking about how there's this area that I'm very passionate about, preventative medicine, just making this an analogy to the medical world, right? Preventative medicine, preconception care, whatever it is. There's a number of different words that kind of encompass the idea that we can focus on our wellness before we're ill, or prepare for something that is to come, prepare our bodies for pregnancy, whatever the case may be. I feel like this conversation falls in line with that, in that these things exist. There is a place for them already in the structure of medicine and society, but they're still kind of secrets, so to speak. Not many people are utilizing them or taking advantage of them. And that is true for both the medical professionals, the birth workers, but also clients and patients. They just don't know that they can harness the power of, be it preventative medicine, preconception care, preparing for baby in advance. It all kind of goes together as part of the same story that we are trying to change the narrative of, so that people don't have the experience you had the first time around. And on that note, I actually realized I'm really curious. We never talked about your third baby. How far down the road after you had that kind of more magical second experience did you have the third baby?
It was a while. I mean, I love, the early childhood years, and I love being a mom. So I wanted a third, maybe a couple years after the second. But my husband was like, no, I think we're done. And I was like, oh, shucks. I even started moving rooms around. Like I combined because they're like twins, my first two. So I'm like, I got him a bunk bed. I was preparing a room to be a nursery again, secretly. And then my husband said no. And then a few years after this, like my baby fever, and he said no, he turned 40 and then he changed his mind. He was like, oh my gosh, I think I have a biological clock too. And all of a sudden I want another baby. I was like, woohoo! So, oh my gosh, it happened really fast. I'm like super fertile. And so, yeah, our first two are 6 and 7 years older than the baby, who's now 3. So,
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And so what was that experience like?
That was, every experience has been so different. It was great in a lot of ways because I already knew what to expect. What was hard for me was juggling the older two. So what I did was I homeschool. And so I'm used to being with my older two all the time. And I didn't realize how much I would miss them when the baby came. And I packed their schedule. So even though we homeschool, we have a lot of like activities. And so that semester, I loaded them up with even more activities. And so our nanny would take them to these activities, and I was home with the baby, and I didn't realize how much I'd miss them. And plus, I think just having my third at a little bit older age, I was 38, it was just a different experience. Like the hormonal shift was different. The recovery was different because he was almost 10 pounds.
Ooh.
And and so all that was just a little bit different. And I experienced postpartum depression. And, I know now, just to be more just vigilant about that when I talk to mamas, because I was like, oh, I don't have history of depression. I didn't have postpartum depression with my first two, so it was not in my radar to be on the lookout for it. And my husband was actually the one who noticed it and brought it up. And so I got the help, and, and the big thing is once I got the help, so I went to therapy, and then also around that time was when we sleep train. That was the other thing with my first. At 4 months, when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, I need to sleep before this next baby comes. And so we researched sleep training. I was like, will we mess this baby up? And my husband, he did all this research, and we decided it was going to be okay. So we did it. And so I've sleep trained all my kids. And so when the third, I sleep trained him also. That coincided with just the getting help and all that stuff. Like I finally felt normal again. But yeah, it was definitely a whole nother experience.
It's funny when you mentioned postpartum depression earlier in the conversation, I assumed you were talking about after your first baby, because that's the one you were saying was hard and the second one was easy. But that's when I realized we'd never talked about the third. So there you go. It's interesting that it got you after the third when you'd had that hard first experience, and that you don't consider that you were depressed at all with the first. You just were acknowledging how hard it was. And
I probably had postpartum blues, which was, just a shorter, which is even more common. But I wasn't crying all the time. Like with my third, I would just start crying because I was just exhausted. And I had more on my plate with the two kids and homeschooling. So it was a different experience. With my first, it was hard, but she was my sole focus. I wasn't working. I didn't have any other kids yet. Our home was, our starter home, which it was, there wasn't a lot in the household running of things. And so I just had more time for her. And same for the second. The second, I got a little bit more help because I needed it. But yeah, the third, it was another kind of like humbling experience that knocked me down, because I'm like, I'm a pro at this. And it just shows you how every baby that comes is going to change your life, and it's all different.
Well, you can't be your own midwife. You can't be your own doctor. You can't be your own coach. You can't be your own anything. You've got to look to other people for that. But I love how you frame that as humbling, because we all, I think, do need to be humbled sometimes, because it makes us better people, especially those of us who are helpers. I think we use those experiences to build exactly what you've done. You've built your business on the experiences that have humbled you. So that third one, I'm sure, added another element or flair to the work you do. And going back to your postpartum depression and how your partner is the one who identified it, that's one of the most enormous reasons I bring partners into as many sessions as I can, especially prenatally. I actually don't care if they're there for every session after, unless it relates to stuff where we really need their assistance. But if we're kind of getting into pelvic floor and various other things, whatever, we can be alone for those sessions, and that's fine. But I look the partners in the eyes and say, you are the best set of eyes and ears that she's going to have. And we need you to be aware. You know this person. You know who she is today. And if a little voice in your head is telling you, this is not my partner, honor that voice. Talk to me. Talk to your local provider. Get it out of your mouth, right? So they all have my phone number. They all know they can reach out to me anytime, because it's exactly that. Partners are the ones that are going to find it. So I'm really glad that you shared that detail, because we don't stress that enough, I think. Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit podcast. You know, I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started Mother Wit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too.
Yeah, and what I like to teach now too is because of that experience. So there's the Edinburgh Perinatal Depression Scale. So there's that quiz that you can find online anywhere. And, it's recommended that you take it around 28 weeks, or whenever you hear this. And if you're pregnant, just take it. And then have it scheduled. Put it in your calendar to take again at around 6 to 8 weeks, and maybe even more down the line. So you have a baseline of your score of how you're feeling, and maybe you're already feeling really down, while you're pregnant, and you can get the help then. But if you're feeling fine, that's great. And then it's like plugged into your schedule to just kind of a reminder to check in with yourself. And also your partner, tell your partner about this. And that way it's not going to fall through the crack, because we're not going to remember, several weeks later when we're juggling all these other things. And so if you it's kind of like just create your own process to check in with yourself.
Yeah, and people's providers should be giving them this scale, but it doesn't happen everywhere. I'm impressed with pediatricians, actually, because many of my clients will tell me that their pediatrician gave them this already, usually early in the postpartum period. So I do offer this to everybody kind of early as well. And I've been impressed with the number of people who have said to me, oh, I've already taken that. My pediatrician gave it to me. I'm like, right on, pediatricians. Good job.
That's awesome. I actually have an interview with a pediatrician for my podcast later today, and I wonder if she's going to say that.
Cool. Yeah, very interesting. You'll have to let me know. All right. Is there anything else that you think we missed that's critical to the way you think about this that you want to share with listeners before we wrap up?
To wrap up, is, and this is just the, tip of the iceberg to just drop this and like say bye. But, the self, it's the knowledge, that piece, like you educate a lot of women and moms too, and partners. There's the big education piece that's needed. And then there's like the softer side, which is like the self-care, and I think I learned this only through experience, not because I prepared myself for it. And it's what I like to teach moms too is, don't forget yourself. Put things in your calendar, your first date night, your first self-treat, to get a massage or a facial, something tangible, and so that you don't forget about it. Put it in your calendar now, even if you're like still in your second or third trimester. And that way you don't forget about yourself, because it's very, very easy to do.
I love that you brought that up. In my online course, Thriving After Birth, I have a handout that one of the therapists who guest stars in the course came in and provided, was this little document where you can use this piece of paper, print it out, put it on your refrigerator, and you can list, what are the things I would do for myself if I just had 5 minutes? Because we know that 5 minutes is a lot of time when you have a newborn. What are the things I would do for myself if I had 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, so forth? You can rearrange these in whatever way makes sense for your life, and as time progresses, you can alter those windows. But if while you are not feeling stressed or anxious or nervous or sad or tired or emotional in any way, so while you're still pregnant and in a good headspace, get down on paper those things you do for yourself that fit those time domains. You can go to that list when you can't think straight and say, oh my God, I actually have 5 minutes. What's on my list? What can I do? And so that's like, I feel like that's in line with what you said about like looking at your life. What do you do each day, each week, each month? It's kind of one of those ways of thinking. So
I love that. And yeah, that's like transferable to any time of your life, like one of my values is efficiency. And so whenever I have like 5 minutes, I think, even now, I'm not in postpartum, but what can I do in like this 15-minute block time that I have the energy for? Because sometimes I don't have the energy, so I'm just going to not do anything. I'm going to binge on my Housewives, and that's my 15 minutes. Or if I have more energy, then I'll do one of the tasks I know I have to do, so it's like just self-care, using your time well.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's nothing, and that's great.
And it's also about being honest about what self-care means, because we might want to write on that paper, read a book, and then it's like, ha, 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 I'm so tired, I can't think. I'm not going to read a book. So like, be really honest with yourself about what's possible when you're feeling sleep deprived and all of these things. Kallista, I have really loved this conversation and loved having you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on. I love talking to you too.
Tell our listeners how they can find you.
Oh, I'd love to. So I'm on Instagram at New Mom Boss. Website is also newmomboss.com, and my podcast is the New Mom Boss Podcast.
Nice and easy, and I'll put it in the show notes to make it even easier. Thank you for listening to the Mother Wit Podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwitmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.